there, book lovers. So glad you're joining me on this Again and Again author interview. This month, we're talking with Mary Holloman, the author of The Anxious Lily. I am so excited to share this book and this sweet author with you. Be sure to stay to the end to find out who we'll be chatting with next month and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more book fun. Enjoy our chat. How are you doing today, Mary? I'm
I'm
glad to
great,
hear it.
Valerie.
I hear that you are taking a break from VBS today to join us.
Yes, it is VBS week, and so we're all very exhausted and running around like crazy. But kids are downstairs getting lunch right
Yes.
now and trying to recover. So
It's always hard to be the one of the volunteers there and just you love it and are in it, but then you still got to be mom at home.
right, it's no way. We've
So,
been doing
yep,
VBS a
just
long
usually
time.
comes with the territory and it's summertime. Well, Mary, tell
Yeah,
us a little bit about yourself and your family as we get started.
sure. Yeah, my name is Mary Holloman, and I have been married to my husband for 11 years now, and we have three children: an 8-year-old who's going into the third grade, a 6-year-old who's starting first grade soon, and then a 2-year-old who is everything you think about the stereotypical
Plus,
2-year-old.
being the
She's
third
there,
kid, which means she
but
thinks she's just as strong and capable as the 8-year-old, right? Oh, yeah.
fearless and gives a heart attack like today. They're wonderful. We have so much fun together. So yeah, the last 10 years has been a mix of, you know, full-time stay-at-home mom, part-time working, homeschool, a little bit of everything. So since it came along, it's been a whirlwind. And then of course, lots of writing
Well,
whenever
let's
I
just
can
add
fit it
in writing
in
a children's
between.
book here, and no big deal. Well, Mary, did you always want to be a children's book author?
You know, I have always loved reading and books. I mean, I don't have any memories without having a book like in my book bag or carrying it around with me as a kid. And I've always loved books for children, but I didn't really start reading children's books a ton until, of course, I had kids. And so we read all the time, like as soon as my son was born. I mean, we were just reading, reading, reading. And I just grew to really love these stories. I think there's something really special about how children's books can touch children and the ones reading the books to the children. So parents, grandparents, caregivers. I think that's such like a hard thing to do, and it's so special when you find one that really connects,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's funny or serious or what it's about. And so it was after when those days, the newborn days, when you're just lots of naps and they want to snuggle with you. So I just remember holding my son and rocking him a ton. And during those long stretches where I'd have time, I would just start coming up with stories in my head. And my son would always be one of the characters because I would want to tell him a story. And suddenly I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to write that down. That I really like where this is going. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. As the older I, I mean,
So
kids
much.
give you so much material like to write. Yeah, so much. So I would say definitely my kids was kind of the gateway into trying to
Kind of
start
the same
writing for
here. I
children.
always had a passion for books and writing, but it wasn't until I was sitting there with my kids and just like this to have that burden to have good material for my kids to read and the passion for books to collide was a place I couldn't say no to anymore. What fun. Well, what was your inspiration for Lola the Lily and the Anxious Lily?
Yes. Well, I have always struggled with anxiety most of my life, as many people do. And one Sunday I was in church. Our pastor was preaching on Matthew chapter 6. And I mean, I grew up in the church, so I was very familiar with that passage, but he was preaching about it. And, for those listening who may not be familiar, Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is speaking to a group of people about anxiety. And he's saying, like, look at the lilies of the field. They don't toil or spin to make their own clothing, but God clothes them and they're dressed finer than even kings. So won't I provide for you if I provide for even the lilies? And I was just struck by this mental image of a flower trying to make its own clothes. I just thought that was such a funny thing. And I was like, what if that happened? That would be like, I just pictured this flower bent over and like angsty and working. And I just had this moment of like, oh my gosh, like that's me when I am bent over and worry. Like I'm not standing tall and experiencing and
Right.
appreciating the moments as they come. I'm missing out on life because I'm so like in my own head. And so I just started scribbling notes and went home and put my son down for a nap and just started writing, writing, writing. And that's kind of where Lola came to life
Too
after that
fun.
time
It,
reading
it
the
was one of
word.
those things is when you started to post about this story, and as that story was coming to reality, it was one of those like, why hasn't anyone done this before? It was like, this is, I mean, Matthew 6, we all, those that have been in church most of their life, it's very familiar, but, to have such a visual representation is perfect for,
Yeah.
especially in this season where anxiety is just such on a rise, and to give kids words to communicate those feelings that they have inside. And so I really have enjoyed watching this story come to life.
It's fun. Yeah, I've had so many people say to me, like, oh my gosh, yeah, why hasn't this story been told before? And I'm like, well, it's been told for thousands of years. It
That's
was in the
right.
Bible, and now we just have pictures,
Now, I
to kind
think
of,
you had
yeah.
mentioned on your Instagram at one point that your son helped you with one of the illustrations. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah, sure. And I've got the book here. I'll flip it open so you can see. This was one of the coolest parts. I'm very much an advocate for just like bringing your kids into your work and not
Mm-hmm.
separating, like not holding them at arm's length. But it's especially fun with writing because when, I signed the contract and we started the process and my publisher was
Mm-hmm.
asking for ideas for illustrations, which is very unique. A lot of publishers don't do that. Um, so we sat down together. We were homeschooling at the time, and we started just brainstorming. And so I asked his opinion on what he thought would be a good visual representation of this flower bent over working so hard. And so we sketched out some ideas, and this illustration here in particular was something that we put our heads together on. This idea of Lola bent over with the moon behind her and like stars, and you kind of see the colors of the night with clothes flying everywhere. That was something that we sketched out and sent to the publisher, and it was so exciting when I got the illustrations back and we saw it. And my son was like, "That was our idea." Like he was like, "Is my name going to be on the book because like I contributed?" I was like, "Not this time. Maybe someday." But
Too
yeah,
fun. I bet he did have a big sense of pride when he saw that. Yeah. Well, what do you hope to communicate the most with your book to kiddos?
yeah. Well, I think you mentioned it already about how anxiety is so on the rise, especially since 2020 with the pandemic and everything. So many kids were just asked to carry these loads that they really should never be asked to carry mentally and emotionally. And so my hope is that this story is a really fun way to bring truth to life and ultimately to point kids to the Bible, because when you look at Jesus's time on earth, one
Mhm.
thing he did was he told stories. He gave stories to help people understand big ideas and truths. And that's exactly what Matthew 6 is. And so, one, I hope it reminds children that God is trustworthy and faithful, and He meets all their needs, no matter what the circumstances look like. But also that the Bible is the ultimate source to go to. So I'm hoping they'll read this and be like, wait, Matt, this is in the Bible, and go
Right.
look and see what the Bible says for itself. Because this book is not a source of truth, the Bible is. And so I'm hoping that it'll kind of awaken an excitement for the illustrations that are already in the word just by giving a face, giving a character, giving a name,
Right.
Lola, to this idea that's already there, and that it'll help, just kind of
Right.
grow
And
a
kind
love
of, what
for
is it?
God's word.
With children's Bibles, there's always, pictures of Jesus and pictures of disciples or just pictures of the characters. But it is harder in those children's Bibles for them to communicate the words that Jesus has said and just the power behind those. So I love that
Yeah,
Lola has done that for us and just making that analogy so tangible. Well, what
yeah, me
does your
too.
family think of your writing?
Well, I've already mentioned how involved my son has been. My whole family is super supportive, and we've really tried to make it like a team effort. Like when the book came out in March, I called my kids, my marketing team, and they helped me come up with ideas. And they'll be the first to walk up to someone and to tell them, "Did you know my mom wrote a book? And here's where you can get it," and all the things. Um, and I like being able to get ideas from them for like future stories. There's been so many times, like I mentioned earlier, they give me lots of material. And so we'll talk about it and I'll ask them, do you think this is funny? Would you read something like this? And so it's fun to make it kind of a team effort and family affair. And my husband is so, so, so supportive, and helps me have those quiet moments so I can pound out some writing too.
Oh,
I
that's
need it.
so fun. What is it? Kids make the best beta readers. There was a project I was working on, and I had my, I guess, 14-year-old read it, and he was rolling on the floor at gymnastics. So I was like, okay, this is funny. This is good. If my 14-year-old is willing to put
Yeah,
aside his, what is it, angst of being with mom and watching brother do gymnastics to roll on the floor. So it's lots of fun to involve kids in the projects that we're working on. Now, okay, so what is the most impactful book in your life, Mary, other than the Bible?
other than the Bible. Okay. I've thought a lot about this, and I would have to say, and I have it right here, I'd have to go with Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Because when I was in high school, I don't know who it was, somebody handed me a book by C.S. Lewis. It wasn't this one, it might have been the Screw Tape Letters, but it got me started on this journey of reading all of his works. And I remember I got to this book as a high schooler at a time when I was starting to like
Mm-hmm.
question some things. Like I grew up in the church, and I think every person who grows up in the church comes to a point where they're like, okay, is this my
Right.
faith or is this my parents' faith? And you start to kind of wrestle with some of those things. And I just remember reading Mere Christianity and feeling like I had found someone who just totally understood human nature, and it was like he had crawled inside my head almost. And even like his one of the chapters talks about, Jesus is either a
Mm-hmm.
liar, a lunatic, or a Lord. And I remember as 15, 16 year old reading that and being like, oh my gosh,
Right.
like I get it now. Like I understand. And so through the years, I've read it many times. I will give this book to people, to friends I have who are wrestling with questions too. I just feel like it's
Yeah.
really helped strengthen my faith, and affirm, because, C.S. Lewis's story, he was very much against Christianity when he was setting out to write this book. And so it just felt like I'd found a friend when I started reading his work. So I'd probably have to say Mere Christianity
Definitely
for
a good
sure.
one. And what is it? I love C.S. Lewis's works. And what is it? He was such a was it a childlike spirit, but such a wise man too. And so it's always fun to
Yeah.
look at all of his things. Now, when did you first call yourself a writer, Mary?
That's a good question. And some days I still even struggle with that. It's like the what's it
Right.
called? Imposter syndrome, when you spend all your time doing something and honing your craft, but you still doubt that you're any good at it. Um, so that's definitely, I feel like that's the way with a lot of writers. We struggle with like our identity with what we do. But I think when I started like taking myself
Mm-hmm.
seriously as a writer and actually telling people I write what I do, this was probably about 9 or 10 years ago, not long before my son was born. For about 10 years, I worked for a pregnancy resource center, and I did a lot of their communications and such. And so I would write articles for them about the issues of
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy and some of these ethical issues that play at pregnancy centers. And I remember writing it and researching it and putting myself into it. And it wasn't until someone like reached out to me and told me like this really impacted how I think about these issues, and kind of voiced to me
Yeah.
that it meant something to them. I really feel like it kind of like flipped a switch in my mind where I realized words can really change people's hearts on stuff. Like words put in the right order can impact a person's heart and mind. And that's something I've always known, in my head. But it was in that moment where I was like, I think writing words that tell the truth is so impactful because those words don't go away. Like they exist forever. And so I think at that point I was like, okay, I've got something to write about. I've got purpose and I can like impact
Mm-hmm.
others with what I write. I think I can call myself now. So, we have ups and downs. There are definitely days where I'm like, I'm a terrible writer. But I definitely think that was kind of a turning point for me where I started saying, okay, I'm taking myself seriously. I'm putting in the time to develop this talent. I can call myself
I
a
know it
writer.
seems to be like a daily battle. It's like, okay, yes, I'm going to put myself out there and do this
Yeah.
today. Okay, well, if you well, if you could spend a day with another popular writer, living or dead, who would you pick?
This is another hard question. I thought a lot about this. Um, so I would say
Oh,
I'm going to cheat a little bit and say I'm going to pick my person for
okay,
fiction and
all right.
nonfiction. Is that okay? Is that like very different? If it was a fiction writer, I'd probably say Andrew Peterson. So he's the author
Mm-hmm.
of the Wingfeather Saga, but he's a singer, songwriter, musician. Um, the Wingfeather Saga completely like gutted me. It's such a good series. I'd recommend it to anybody. And I would love to just talk to him about his world building and character development because it's just so
Mm-hmm.
compelling. So he would be my person. My nonfiction person would probably be Russell Moore. So he has written many books on issues about like the family, about the life issue. So currently he works for Christianity Today, but he used to be the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. But he's written one of my favorite books, The Storm Tossed Family. And I think he just has a real talent for writing difficult to
Yeah.
understand truths in a clear way. And that's I tried to emulate in my article. So I'd love to talk with him, talk strategy with him about how
I
he
know as I follow Andrew Peterson, and there are definitely times where I'm like, I wish I lived in Nashville so I could be part of the Rabbit Room because that looks like a fun place to be. Yes,
it looks
yes.
amazing.
Okay, you
Yes.
mentioned one of your favorite books, but is that your favorite book other than the Bible? Is that one you just mentioned?
I would probably have to say, if you ask me right now in this moment, which you are, the
Oh
Wing
yeah.
Feather Saga is probably my favorite right now. Yeah, and I know that's cheating a little bit because it's a series. Um, but for anyone who's not familiar, this is book one. Um, it's similar vibes to Harry Potter
Mm-hmm.
meets maybe Lord of the Rings and other world. It's a complete world that he's built, but strong themes of
Family.
self-sacrifice and putting family like very life affirming. A lot of books now they paint the parents as being just these disconnected idiots who don't know anything, but it's very
Mm-hmm.
like strong
Yes.
parental figures who are involved in lives, but also like the
Mm-hmm.
kids solve their own problems. So technically, like young adult fiction, but I love it.
That's
I
the
think
sign
it's
of
great
a
for all
good book
ages.
is that it can be for any age. Well, fine.
Yes.
Okay, you mentioned that you had been a writer for the pregnancy center. Is that where your writing journey began?
Mhm. I don't know if there's like a specific point where you could say that began because I've been writing as long as I can remember. My mom is actually a very successful published author, and we were homeschooled for a short bit, and so she would work with us a lot on writing and telling stories. And I remember, like, even in elementary school, we would read the
Mm-hmm.
stories out of like our readers, and then go home and I would like rewrite the stories or I'd write a sequel. And I assumed that everybody did that. I maybe not, but I've always just enjoyed. I mean, I've got an embarrassing amount of journals filled with poetry from the years that will never see the light of day because it's like all high school angsty stuff. But um, it's always just been a part of my life. But it was when, I was working for this pregnancy center and they specifically said, we need some content. And up to that point, I had never written for someone. And so that was what got me thinking more, I guess, strategically about writing. Like, how can you write towards a particular audience? And then so from then on is when I started pursuing opportunities to write for different outlets, parenting sites, things like that. So that's when I guess you could say, official
or like you
writing
said
journey.
earlier,
Probably.
when you started to take yourself seriously, right? Well, fun. Okay, so what is your favorite children's book other than your own?
Okay, yeah, I thought long and hard about this. It's so difficult because there are so many wonderful ones. But if I absolutely had to pick, I would probably say, and if we're talking about
try to
picture
stay here.
books specifically,
Yes.
I would say Curtain and the. I first read this about 8 or however long it's been out. It was when it was a pretty new book, and I just think this is such a effective, powerful tool for communicating the gospel to kids. Like, there's a big emphasis of this is, of course, the curtain. So the curtain that separated in the temple from the Holy of Holies, and it separated the people. I had never before been able to verbalize the significance of the curtain and how Jesus' death and resurrection removed the separation between us and God. And so I think the illustrations are wonderful. The words are just so simple but profound. This is it's getting worn on the edges because we go through it with all our kids. So I would have to say
that's definitely a favorite on my
one.
shelf. It stays out year round, not just at Easter, just because it is such a sweet thing to walk through, just the gospel and just how simple it is. Like, we sin so we can't get in, so Jesus made a way for us to come in. And so I love that book. I love all those tales that tell truth stories. Those are always whole series.
Yeah,
Yes,
we have all of them.
My husband's like, "Are we buying another one of these books?" I'm like, "Uh huh." You're like, our kids are reading chapter books now. I'm like, "Uh huh, yes, I do." Doesn't matter. Well, Mary, what are you reading right now?
Okay, so I usually try to be reading one fiction and one nonfiction book at any given time. I kind of work through them at the same time. So my nonfiction book is Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland, and I'm very slowly going through this one because it's so it's like chewing on a big old steak. But it's focusing on so the subtitle is The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers. So it's really diving into scripture, what scripture says about who Jesus really was, and how for many people who are Christians, who have especially been Christians for a long time, we start to get this idea that Christ is so sick of hearing from us. And when we mess up again and again, he's just like, ugh, you again? And so it's really diving into how much he delights in hearing from us, and he loves to heal us and forgive us. And so it really kind of helps us to have an accurate picture of who he is. So that's the one that I'm working through right now. And then for my fiction, I just started this one. This is Peter Nimble and His Fantastic Eyes. And it says strange. So Jonathan I'm not going to say his last name right, Auxier, I think. I just finished one of his other books. It's called Sweep, the story of a girl and her monster. And it was fantastic. I laughed and cried. It was so good and very life affirming and about self-sacrifice. So I wanted to give another one of his books a try. And it's very interesting and fun so far. He writes very he takes reality, but then insert some magic or fantasy into it. So for those of you who like fantasy and magic,
very cool. I'm
going
to add that to my list, much to my husband's chagrin, but Too fun. Okay, well, what can we expect next from you, Mary? I know you just had something come out, but
yeah, right. I actually just last night sent off several proposals for review for some more children's picture books. I have a couple that are also faith-based, like the Anxious Lily, but
Mhm.
also some that would be more general market. So just for fun, just about life as a kid. And I'm also working on a few other projects. One is a devotional I'm developing a concept for, and then I've also started writing I guess it would fall into a middle grade novel category. It started as me just telling a story to my kids. Um, we, when I would take them to school, we have this really old historic district house that's on the corner, and it's just like crumbling, it's falling apart. And so we'd pass it every day, and I just started telling them a story about the house, just making it up. And they were like, "You need to tell us what happens." And I was like, so it's turned in. I'm in this now. I'm like deep into this story. So I'm hoping I can develop that and send it off to be considered. But yeah, other than that, I'm also trying. I try to be very proactive in having articles out at all times. So I've got some pending articles that will be published later this summer on various topics about unplanned pregnancy and such. And so I'm just trying to stay busy and keep creating content
It's so
and seeing
exciting.
where it takes
I
me.
saw your article in, was it Clubhouse about what was it?
Yeah,
The pregnancy center thing that you and your son did. That was really fun to kind of see your face
yeah,
there.
yeah. Yeah, it was super exciting. That was a nice surprise because I'm sure you're familiar. When you send stuff off, a lot of the time you don't hear for like months. And so I'd forgotten about it. And then 6 months after I sent it, they were like, "Oh, we'd love to use this." And I was like, "Oh, this is great." And then I forgot about it again. And then it came out 6 months later. So it's neat. There's a lot of like learning to be patient with writing and waiting because
It
everything
does.
moves very slowly sometimes. So that was a fun
Well, we
surprise.
enjoyed seeing your face, and my kids are like, "Wait a minute, is that the same lady that did the Anxious Lily book?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it is." So we had fun seeing you. Well, Mary, where can we find out more about you and your books?
Yeah, well, I love connecting with people here on Instagram. So you can follow me, Mary T. Holloman. And then I also have a website, maryholloman.com. And I have a blog there and also a page exclusive with Anxious Lily content. Lots of free downloads that I've put together for families, activities, things like that. And you can also find me on Facebook as well under the
Too
same name.
fun. Well, I look forward to seeing what's coming next from you, and loving hanging out with Miss Lola and you today, and look forward to seeing what comes next. Thank you for joining our chat today. I hope you enjoyed getting to know Mary and hear more about her book. Next month, we'll be talking with Kara Snyder and her book, There's an Elephant on My Chest. Be sure to subscribe and join us again next month. Happy reading.